Good morning, Santa Clarita. You're listening to your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS. I am attorney Wade Skalsky, and this is Wade Beyond the Courtroom. Today, we're going to be talking with our new friend, the First Amendment. We're going to be learning about the 5 freedoms and perhaps get into a little bit of history. But before we do all of that, on the board today, Mike Dowler. How are you?
Wade Skalsky, I am fine. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm very fired up today. It is a beautiful day in Santa Clarita. It's not too hot yet, which is always nice.
Exactly.
Radio 101, when in doubt, start with the weather, right?
I love it.
Well, there's 2 things I'm not going to start with, though, is your shirt today, which I have to say is impressive.
This shirt says I'm on vacation.
That's right.
But I'm not really.
It's radio gold to always talk about visuals that people can't see. So you're wearing I would say it is a autumn type shirt with leaves of various colors that all of them clash, which I like.
I have had this shirt for about 7 years.
I feel like
It's been in Alaska, Hawaii, Mexico. It's really, it's traveled well.
I feel like I need a margarita while I look at that shirt. But besides deciding to put on that shirt today, did anything else happen exciting for you today or this week?
Other than battling the flu for a couple of days, no, not really.
All right. Well, the good thing is, on our new studio, you are very far away from me. So
Yes.
we don't have that. We don't have that big. You know, in some studios, you'll actually be like in a glass box of emotion over there with just the the board.
Those are the old days.
Okay, but not anymore. Well,
Yeah.
good. Well, I'm glad you seem like you're feeling better now.
Yeah.
So before we get into our friend,
By the way, your shirt's nice too.
well, it's just a black shirt.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's pretty fashion forward, or not.
Yes.
Okay, so before we start talking about the First Amendment, your friend today, and the 5 freedoms, which I'm incredibly excited about, I want to talk a little bit about this news story that is coming out about all these people getting salmonella from ducks and chickens.
That was just on CNN.
It was, and I also saw it yesterday, and it's kind of it's never amusing when people get salmonella. That's not like a good comedy routine to start. However, do you know why people are getting salmonella from ducks and chickens?
Because they're hugging them?
Because they're hugging them, yes, absolutely. So I grew up on a farm, and you did not want to hug the chickens. You did not want to get emotionally attached to them because something bad was going to happen to those chickens at the end of the season, if you will.
Yeah, you'll get beaked to death, or you'll get...
No, that's not what's bad. What's going to happen? We had a tremendous technological advantage over those chickens when I was young, so we were guaranteed to win that fight every single time.
Yeah, well.
So if I can give you one medical tip of advice out there, do not hug chickens or ducks. You will possibly get salmonella. In fact, 83% of the cases of salmonella, I guess last month, were due to people hugging chickens and ducks.
Are you practicing salmonella law now?
I'm not practicing salmonella law. I'm just trying to do a public service announcement for the safety of everyone in Santa Clarita, Newhall, and Belize, because remember, we are huge in Belize.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out. But
So that was our Wade Beyond the Courtroom part. Let's actually get into the law a little bit. How does that sound? Right. So we're going to talk about your other friend, the First Amendment. We've learned before that the Fifth Amendment is also our friend, but the First Amendment is also our friend. So do you know what a big misperception, Mike, is about the First Amendment?
freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech, exactly. Everyone knows that the First Amendment goes to freedom of speech.
But wait, there's more.
There is more. There are actually what is called the 5 freedoms with regards to the First Amendment. And if you want to stump someone at a cocktail party, just ask them, say, hey, do you know what the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment are? Usually people will be able to get 1 or 2. My wife this morning got 4, which I was like, wow. And I couldn't remember the 5th one myself. So my wife and I tied. And I'm a lawyer. That's sad.
She's sharp.
She is sharp. She's super smart. We're going to have her in here soon in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about some entertainment law.
Yeah.
And she's going to assist us with another segment we like to call fiction or real in the movies about the law.
Like
so
that.
that's what we call a tease in the radio business, right? But I think that's a weekly tease. Like it's going to be some unknown point in the future, a week or 2 in advance.
I like that.
That's a new
Cool.
We're going to call it the Wade Beyond the Courtroom tease.
We're gonna talk about that.
It's an indeterminate amount of time when we're going to get this guest in. We don't know, but we're working on it.
Cool.
Anyways, all right, so let's talk about the 5 freedoms before we even first talk about anything specifically. Do you want to guess what they are? Can you guess one? That's okay. I like to put you on the spot because dead air is always right. Go for Google. It's worth a Google. The 5 freedoms are freedom of assembly,
Yes.
freedom to petition the government, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech. I put freedom of speech last because everyone knows that one first.
Freedom of the press really falls under freedom of speech, I think.
Well, it's actually specifically delineated in the First Amendment. The First Amendment is the first 45 words of the Bill of Rights. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Let me confirm. No, yes, absolutely. No, let me read the First Amendment to you. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. See, it has its own little paragraph or sentence in there.
Right.
Or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So the First Amendment actually has a lot in it. It's the 5 freedoms, and it's one of the cornerstones, besides the Fifth Amendment, which we talked about previously, of why our country is so great. If someone ever comes up to you and says, the United States is not great, I don't care what religion they are, or politics they have, or even if they're a vegetarian, you simply say, no sir, or no madam, the United States is great, and here's why.
Yeah.
The mere fact that the person gets to say that out loud is because of the First Amendment.
We've got a pretty good thing here.
We do, yes. Does it need
Remember,
improvements?
those amendments are a U.S. thing.
That's right. That's right.
Across the border, it's a total different thing.
We're going to talk a little bit of history, too, about where some of the First Amendment comes from. But listen, man, I mean, the whole reason that a person can walk around the street and go up to strangers and say, you know what, I don't like the United States, and I get to disagree with them, but I don't have to have them be arrested by the government for that, stems from the First Amendment. People sometimes take for granted even the opportunity to say that out loud without fear of repercussion from the government is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So when we come back from the break, we're going to start unpacking the First Amendment, your friend, and I'm excited to start chatting about it. You're listening to Wade Beyond the Courtroom. This is KHTS AM 1220. Welcome back, Santa Clarita. You're listening to your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS. I am attorney Wade Skalsky, and this is Wade Beyond the Courtroom. So I think we've gone off the rails already over the break. Mike and I have decided that the Wade Beyond the Courtroom theme song, or not theme song, but theme is "Don't Hug a Duck." I guess that's our motto. So PETA, that's PETA on the line.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just put them on hold. We don't want to talk to them. They're not going to be happy. So, no, and then my wife is online too. Okay, so she's not happy with me now either. But look, I don't want to get salmonella. Anyways, I didn't know that the show could go so off the rails talking about the First Amendment. But first, let's talk a little bit about history before we get into the specifics of the 5 freedoms delineated by the First Amendment. So, Mike, did you know that the
chickens? Yeah.
Is that another sound drop in?
Yeah.
Check you out. I like that. The chicken's going in. We are off the rails now officially.
That's the barnyard scene.
I would like to bring us back now. There are chickens in the studio running around. Do not hug them. Call the animal control. It is dangerous. Salmonella. Do not come down to the station. All right. So, Mike, did you know that the First Amendment was ratified in December of 1791? So this is another little trivia question that you can stump people with, because most people are thinking, when they think of the Constitution, they're like, oh, it's sometime around 1776,
right.
Declaration of Independence. The reason why it's called the First Amendment is because the Bill of Rights actually was not in the original Constitution. That's why it's an amendment.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
That's right.
I stunned you right
There's
there, right?
Yes. The key word. Yeah.
My logic is inescapable. So 1791 is basically that the Bill of Rights was ratified in that year, and it protects the freedoms of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition, as we've talked about. So let's talk about today. We're not going to talk about the First Amendment too much. We can maybe get back to it, but I want to talk about basically the least understood of the 5 freedoms, the freedom of assembly.
Yes.
Okay, now, do you have any idea what the freedom of assembly is? And it's not a pep rally for high school.
The right to assemble and express yourself?
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly.
See, back in the day, back in the 1770s, the English Parliament disbanded the colonial assemblies, and they said, you guys can't meet. And basically what they said, you can't meet unless there's a representative of the monarch present. All right? So think about this. Let's say that I wanted to have a party at my house. All right? And I wanted to have, let's say, 100 people there. I don't know how I would get 100 people to come to my place because, no one likes me. But besides that, well, maybe I could get like 7. You'd come, right?
We like you. Don't
You
worry.
would come, my wife would come, that's 2. But let's say that I could somehow magically get 100 people to come to my house, right? And that was over the limit, let's say, of what the government said I could do. They said, okay, Wade, you can have a party at your house, but you can only have it if you have a member of the government there, so they can monitor what's happening.
Right.
That would be kind of a bummer, don't you think?
Yeah.
Well, and that's what the British Parliament was trying to do, was that they were not happy with the colonies, and they're like, look, you guys can't get together in certain large numbers unless there's a representative of the monarch there, of the king there. And the reason why they did that, obviously, was because, look, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't a easy means of communication back then, so people had to actually, this is, I know, a strange concept for everyone, they actually had to talk to each other in person to get their ideas across. Isn't that kind of crazy?
And I think there are countries out there that will intercede if you're assembling them as well.
Well, yeah,
They want
absolutely.
to know, like, hey, what are you doing here, and how does it affect the country as a whole? Or are you planning a coup, or what are you doing?
Absolutely. And one thing, though, that's been such a great way to kind of get around that in some of these developing countries where they don't have the First Amendment is the internet.
Right.
That is Twitter. It is things like on social media, because there's so many platforms now for people to get their ideas out that the governments are having a hard time on sort of controlling those.
Sure.
Now, we don't have those issues necessarily in this country, but the reason we don't is because the right to assembly. But
Right.
just because it's very unlikely that the people of America would go along with the right to assembly issues in terms of if the government would say that people can't get together. But there is an interesting situation where the government does have the ability to so-called keep the peace. Okay, so there are certain instances where the government can say, all right, if you want to do a parade, you have to get a license, or if you want to protest, you have to get a license for a certain number of people.
Sure.
Another really interesting, technically it's an infringement on the right to assembly, but in sort of my world that I deal with in the criminal defense practice is gang injunctions. So what a gang injunction basically says is that you can't get together with known gang members over a certain number if you yourself are a gang member, or let's say that you've been arrested for some sort of gang crime. The government actually says, no, you guys can't hang out together. So let's say that you grew up with a group of friends, your group of friends are, somehow you were all in a gang when you were younger, which obviously we do not, the two things we don't approve of in Wade Beyond the Courtroom are hugging a duck and gangs. So we've established those two things.
Yeah, how many folks use that as an out? Freedom. I've got freedom to assemble.
Well, that's been challenged in the courts, and it's been denied because the government does listen. The government can keep the peace,
Right.
All right. But there's some really interesting cases back in the day in terms of, and presently too. But one that's really interesting, and because I don't have a perfect memory, is there was a case that I find fascinating that's called NAACP versus Alabama from 1958. All right.
All right.
And what happened here was that the state was trying to force the NAACP to turn over its membership list. Okay, because they were trying to do it under an out-of-state corporations guise that says you're an out-of-state corporation, NAACP in our state, and Alabama wanted to find out who their members were. So now, Mike, do you think that there were some things happening in 1958 that the NAACP was involved with that maybe the state of Alabama disagreed with?
There was a lot going on. Yes.
Right. There was a crazy amount of stuff. It was a crazy time in the civil rights movement. And so, thankfully, the Supreme Court said, no, Alabama, you don't get to have their membership lists because we find that, or we feel that that's could infringe upon the right of assembly. It'd be hard for them to get their message out. It would be basically people would have a disincentive to join the NAACP.
Right.
So, and I find that fascinating that was not very, 1958 is not very long ago.
Not at all.
Okay, that's 50. What is
Well,
that?
before my time, but yeah,
Right. I mean, I was told
way before your time.
I was told there'd be no math today, but let me do the math quickly on this. So it's 42 plus what year are we in? 15. So 57.
Yeah.
Okay, so 57 years ago. It's not very. That's I would say that's one generation. Right?
Right.
And so we had a governmental agency going to the NAACP and saying, give us your lists of who members. So when we come back from the break, we're going to unpack this a little bit more, learn a little bit more history, and learn a little bit more about your friend, the First Amendment. Welcome back, Santa Clarita. You're listening to your hometown station, AM 1220, KHTS. I am attorney Wade Skalsky, and this is Wade Beyond the Courtroom. So, Mike, we were talking about the First Amendment, the 5 freedoms, and most specifically, the right to assembly. So when we were talking before about that the government can't come in and say, okay, we want your lists of your membership, I think this is one reason why everyone was losing their minds on the IRS thing. I don't know if you remember what the IRS was allegedly treating one political party's people a little bit different than another political party's
This is the
people.
whole lowest learner.
Some of the lowest learner
Yeah.
stuff, yeah, that we talked a little bit about before, but that starts to kind of bleed into a similar type of thing. Because what would happen if, like, let's say it doesn't really matter. Let's say that I was a Democratic fundraiser and I wanted to say, well, we want the list of all the Republicans in your organization, or conversely, I'm a Republican fundraiser and I say, well, we want to know all of the Democrats in your organization. If the government can't do that necessarily in terms of now, that's easy information to get because all those people usually registered to vote.
Right.
So you can get that stuff. But the concept is basically the same. So let's take Republican, Democrat out of it. Let's say that you and I were going to elect to let's pick something like we were suddenly pro-space. That's an easy one, right?
Right.
And the whole country turned against exploration of space for some reason. And we're like, nope, we're pro-space. We have an organization that all we care about is promoting going into space and being colonists on Mars, right? And everyone else thought that we were crazy. The government can't come in and say, hey, who are your pro-space people in your organization? Now, a reason why I picked that one is because that's not an inflammatory one, right?
No, yeah.
But the government...
I'm sure there's worse.
There's way worse, and we're going to talk about it right now, okay? There was this case called the National Socialist Party versus Skokie in 1977, all right? And this is a famous case. Now, there's three things now I can add to the list that we're against here in Wade Beyond the Courtroom. We're against gangs, we're against hugging a duck, and we're against Nazis, okay? I think we can all say that we're against those things.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But in 1977, there was this the National Socialist Party wanted to do a march in Skokie, Illinois, and these guys were Nazis, like they were going to go down the street in the whole Nazi regalia, and everybody.
And this still happens, by the way.
Yeah.
In these parades and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what happened is that everyone lost their mind because a lot of survivors of the Holocaust lived in that place, and it was horrible, right? And so, but the courts upheld that they could actually have that march. Okay,
Right.
That's why, and I'm not going to give this group any pub at all because I find it deplorable and despicable, their actions. But there is a group that they are known to picket funerals of veterans today. Okay, and I'm not going to say the name of the group, but they have the right to do that, even though almost 99.5% of the country disagrees with the methods that they're employing. Even if you agree with any of what they say, we can add a fourth thing to the list is picketing veterans' funerals. So
Right.
But it is more for the protection of the rest of the other 99% of the people, because it's easy to marginalize radical causes. It's easy for us to say, well, 99% of people don't like that, so we're not going to let them talk. But then there can be this creep where all of a sudden then it becomes super marginalized, and then now it's bad, and then it's kind of bad, and now it's a majority of the people disagree with this view. So if 51% disagree with that view, then we can ban it. All right, that gap between the Nazis marching in Skokie, Illinois, and 51% of people not liking it so we can ban the speech isn't as great as people think it is. So that's why it's important that we must protect even deplorable speech so that never happens. And that's why
Right.
this country is so great. Even though we can be rightfully infuriated by it, it is, strangely enough, one of the things that makes our country so great.
The amendment doesn't specify either way, so it's got to be inclusive.
Right, and also too, and there can be restrictions upon it, like we talked about. So in terms of, we're talking mostly about the right to assembly here. So we're talking about, there can be gang injunctions.
Let me clarify this. Is that public assembly?
Correct. Yes.
In public.
Well, and it's the government too.
Yeah.
So this is all restrictions upon what the government can do. So, but it applies in schools, for instance. So students have the right to assembly. Now, it's a little bit different because minors don't have, this is an interesting fact, minors don't have as much protections as adults do. They have, that's why you can do curfew laws. You can't, unfortunately, I probably need a curfew law. Before I got married, I should have been, my dad always had a saying, nothing good happens after midnight. I actually think he was being generous. I think nothing good happens after 10:30. So,
And again, I said public assembly because let's say you're at a grocery store parking lot, that's private property. So how does that change?
Well, but you're still, to give the example of the government could still say we can try to moderate any assembly, and they can't.
Yeah.
So it's the government being the actor, though.
Right.
That's the issue. So you can contract into certain things in terms of with an HOA. There's some issues where you.
But if you're on private property, like I said, say you're inside a mall or you're inside a private building, do you lose that right to assemble?
No, you're protected by the government.
Even on private property?
Well, there are some issues that you can. No, I don't want to get too technical here.
Yeah.
But you can sort of agree going into an area, we're not going to suddenly have a party in the mall or something, right? And that's a little bit different. But we're talking specifically about the government. The government cannot infringe upon the right of assembly. It's challenged with what's called a strict scrutiny standard when they try to do that, okay?
Yeah.
And the issue is, just like from back in the day when the British Parliament was saying, look, you can't have all these people together unless we have a representative of the monarch there, the government can't do the same thing. So they can't say, hey, I don't care where you meet, you can't have 20 people in the mall talking about whatever you're going to talk about. I mean, just let's say that we had people who wanted to become communists, okay? So they said there's 100 communists want to get together in the mall and say, we want to turn America into a communist country. They can do that. Well, I don't know in terms of regards to the mall might get mad about it, right? But let's say the 100 communists want to meet in the park and have a rally, right? They can do that. Now, the government can say, listen, you got to get a permit or whatever, but we live in a great country where even views that most of us disagree with are allowed to flourish because, look, it's the clashing of ideas that create good results. It's not the silencing of people. Even if we disagree with people, even if we totally think that they're not smart for believing what they believe, it's the clashing of ideas that results in good ideas in the marketplace being adopted. So anyway, really interesting conversation today, Mike. I'm really glad we got to talk about your friend, the First Amendment.
Yes.
You've been listening to AM 1220 KHTS. I am attorney Wade Skalsky, and this is Wade Beyond the Courtroom.